Good evening. I would like to address the San Francisco protesters who were destroying statues yesterday, the other day, whenever it was. I understand the animosity and the feeling that you need to get rid of any vestige of anything you find offensive. And without getting into that beyond what I've just said, because we all know what it's about, taking down the statue of Cervantes. Really, Cervantes? If you don't know what you destroyed, let me tell you. He was a Spanish writer. He wrote, most notably, Don Quixote, the story of Don Quixote. If you're not familiar with the story, well, first of all, shame on you. You should be staying at home reading and not tearing down statues. But the story of Don Quixote is the story of a man who was a romantic, who fancied himself a knight in an age when chivalry was dying, and he was desperately trying to salvage or sustain any remnant of it, and the notion that he was a champion of this culture, and it was men like him that would be the ones to continue it if it were not to just die on the vine. So he was a little unbalanced, and this manifested itself in different ways, but one of the most pronounced was his habit of tilting at windmills. He thought the windmills were giants and he would tilt at them. For anybody who's unfamiliar with the term, tilting is, in the olden days, knights would joust, and to begin the joust, before either of them were dislodged, what they would do would be to tilt at each other. That is, start a certain distance apart with their lances and charge towards each other, and each one try to dislodge the other one. That was tilting. So Don Quixote would tilt at windmills. If anybody doesn't know what windmills are, that's what Donald Trump calls wind turbines and says are the things that give you cancer. So the term tilting at windmills has come to mean any endeavor which cannot be completed because you're either just taking on something too big, or you're taking on something imaginary. You can't fight something that's not there. Tilting at windmills, well, you might hurt a windmill vane, but you're not going to kill any giants. Basically, tilting at windmills is just a futile cause. Now, an interesting thing about Cervantes is he was in the military. He fought in the Spanish Navy against Ottomans, and I'm not sure if anybody has this exactly right. I've read two different versions, actually more or less three, but he was eventually taken prisoner either by Barbary pirates or Berbers, whom those two terms are used more or less interchangeably, but I don't think they're exactly the same thing. Or uh, Ottoman corsairs, who may or may not have been military. The important thing in this is that he was taken prisoner with another Spaniard who was ransomed off, but Cervantes' family could not afford to pay the ransom, so he became a slave. I think it's important that we keep this in mind, that a Spaniard, possibly with Moorish blood, meaning he was at least part black, was taken prisoner, possibly by blacks, and made a slave. I just want you to consider this may have been the story of the man whose statue you toppled. Whatever the exact details are, and I will try to parse this story exactly. It's hard. We live in the information age, and that means there's even more misinformation and disinformation than there is good information. I got to wade through this stuff and try to figure it out. But we know this. He was a Spaniard, possibly with Moorish blood, who was taken prisoner and made a slave. On top of that, he was a writer. He was a poor man in a time when being poor meant you were just plain miserable. And I say that as a man who has been broke, sleeping under a bridge. I know what it means to be dirt poor. And things are still better today than they were back then, I can guarantee you. But even so, after fighting for his military, getting wounded, getting malaria, being taken captive, being held as a slave, finally being freed, still on top of all this, being a poor man, being able to write what is possibly the best classical fiction that Spain has to offer right now, this is the man whose statue you have taken down. I would like you all to consider what you're doing at this point. Look at the people on the internet who have made one little stupid error, misstep, faux pas, whatever you want to call it, and the mob comes down on them so hard, they're just ruined. They're ruined. Maybe not for a lifetime, but for a span of time. You've got public sentiment on your side right now. The tide is with you. If you are wise, you will not create for yourselves a situation, well, the best term for it is blown by your own petard. Look it up. But when you're tearing down the statues of people like Cervantes and even Grant, yeah, he was a slave owner. It's easy to judge from this distance. Things were much different back then. And don't forget, he did fight on the Union side. He was the one who was there at Appomattox to get Lee to sign the surrender of the South. He became president. He did what he could to destroy the KKK, and he did a pretty good job too. Of course, they came back, but he put them down pretty hard. And he appointed blacks in government positions. Think about what you're doing before you do it. Don't just go out there with rage and hatred as the guiding voice as to what your decisions are going to be. That's what they do. If you start acting like them, you're just like them. So, don't be tilting at windmills. This whole thing can blow up on you. You've got sentiment on your side. Don't waste it. Here's another term to look up if you don't already know what it means, but blowback. If you go too far, I have said enough for this sitting. This was supposed to be done on Monday. I was going to do a Monday commentary, but here it is. And I would just like to say, if anybody is so offended by this that they feel they have to try to punish me, and it's like a cancel culture thing or whatever. First of all, I'm basically a nobody. You can't get me fired. I'm not working. There's really very little you can do except draw even more attention to me than I'm already getting. Do you really want that? And second of all, before you get offended at whatever, whether it's me or statues or this, that, and the other, you have a choice. You can be a victim, or you can change how you respond to things. Things are gonna happen. Good things, bad things. It happens to everybody. Poor black folk on the streets, rich white people, everybody goes through stuff. How you respond to it is up to you. So, I thank you for watching. And if you didn't watch, well, what's wrong with you, man?